Hey guys, so I'm gonna read what I wrote in the description. It says, a Mormon preacher smokes salvia for the first time and finds himself in a parallel reality in which time has been condensed. Over the course of being trapped in this parallel reality for 8 years, he convinces himself that his former life is a false memory in order to adapt to his new life in the parallel reality. After escaping the parallel reality and returning to his old life, he immediately removes himself and his family from the Mormon church because he's convinced that a just God would never allow something so horrific to happen to anyone. His religious beliefs were forever changed from his experience, unquote. So that's what the bulk of this video is going to be about. I'm also going to show a really short clip of another guy talking about how he dreamed of a specific Mandela effect and then it ended up coming true years later. But with the other clip, I mirrored his interview from a channel called, what's it called? The Awfully Irish Podcast. And it's kind of a long interview, so I had to edit it down for time. I feel like he spends too much time talking about his background instead of the actual experience itself. But before I get to those two clips, I just want to say I feel like what this former preacher went through relates directly to the Mandela effect. Now, the way he got to that parallel reality is different from most of us in the Mandela effect community. But I just found it interesting that after he smokes salvia, he wakes up in the parallel reality right after having a near-death experience, which, for anyone who's not familiar with the ME community, a lot of us have had near-death experiences or like circumstances happen to us where we easily could have died prior to discovering the Mandela effect. See, that's what the Mandela effect does. It not only makes you question your life, but like the fabric of reality itself. You know, like it really makes you wonder, is reality something that's not made of matter? Could it be possible that reality is actually made out of consciousness instead of something called matter? Like, what if there is no matter that exists independent of consciousness, whether we're talking about the collective consciousness or individual consciousness? I mean, how else could stuff we thought was solid just change like that with the Mandela effect? I don't think this reality is what we think it is. I think we've been lied to about the physicality of this so-called place to make us think that the spiritual is something that's separate from this realm. I'm to the point to where I think matter is derived from consciousness. Like I don't think consciousness is derived from matter. Like the brain is a product of consciousness, not the other way around. So technically, that would mean there isn't anything that's physical that exists somewhere out there. So we could say matter occurs in consciousness, is made of consciousness, and is observed by consciousness. And to be honest, I've taken it a step further and said, really, there is no matter, there's only consciousness. And I say that, because if that's the case, then that means reality isn't that different from a dream. Because a dream is made of, observed by, and occurs in consciousness. It looks like there's matter in a dream, but it's all just consciousness. I mean, how do you know none of your dreams aren't real? Yeah, we've had those dreams where everything seems blotchy and unstable, But we've also had those dreams where the scenery looks indistinguishable from this reality, to the point to where we don't even realize we're dreaming till after the fact when we wake up. But how do we know when we woke up that we weren't just waking up into another dream layer that everyone here in this dream calls life? Like, what we call waking up could just be us merging with a continuous waking dream. We can't say for sure uh, if what we call reality is a waking dream or not. Like, no one can say. And before you dismiss what I'm saying, just be open minded enough to at least admit that we don't know. Like, nobody knows. That doesn't mean we aren't real. Our experience is very real. There's really no such thing as a fake experience, because the fact that you're experiencing it proves that it's happening. You're the observer or the witness to it, if that makes sense. Basically, what I'm saying is our real body, I'm doing air quotes, our real body isn't somewhere in bed right now as we're living this dream life that we think is real. What I'm saying is um, life and existence itself is a never ending dream within Source or God's mind. So whether or not we have a quote unquote physical body laying down somewhere in another dream layer while we dream, this dream life is irrelevant. So basically, physical matter is probably a lie. Um, yeah, we have real laws of nature and physics here, but you can't tell me that those rules prove that this isn't still a dream. Dreams can follow basic laws and rules. I mean, some dreams seem to have more rigid rules of physics than others. This specific dream just happens to have a rule where there's something that we call gravity and we can't fly. Um, that's not the case for other dream realities, though. And I think a lot of this has to do with word games. Like, I think we've come up with the term dream to kind of just dismiss it. But just because we give it a label doesn't mean we have the slightest clue what it is. All we can say for sure is that it's something we experience, and we know we experience it because it's observed within consciousness, which, I don't know, that kind of sounds like the definition of reality too. Maybe the word reality and dream are synonyms for the same thing. But yeah, we don't know what dreams are. We don't even know how reality or consciousness works. Like, what is consciousness? What is the space between two thoughts? Like, I can't even find the words to describe that, because words would just be more thoughts that have been converted into sounds, which, I mean, that kind of defeats the purpose, because the question was, what is the space between two thoughts? And there'll never be a fully accurate answer to that involves words, because whatever it is, whatever consciousness or awareness is, it's beyond the scope of human words or thought. But of course, we have to speak to communicate, for now anyway. But I say all this because I want you guys to watch this short clip from Brian's channel, and I'll put a link to his video in the description so you guys can check it out. This is a clip of a guy talking about the connection between dreams and a specific family memory he had that was Mandela affected.
So, Lando, what did you have? You said you might have had some personal Mandela effects happen to you that you could discuss.
Okay, I'll share one. And again, it's not going to prove anything to anybody else. It's just my own experience. Every year when I was a little kid, we went camping, and my mom would take pictures, and she kept a family album. I used to love when I was a little kid going in that family album because there's pictures of our vacation. They're very happy times. Just used to love it. My favorite place where we'd camp was up in this place in the Redwoods, and we had a family picture where it was my entire family in front of this one big tree. And this tree had significance because it was supposed to be the biggest tree in the world. Now, I don't know why, but I had this recurring dream most of my life of posing in that family picture, but instead of in front of that tree, it was in front of this other little visiting center. I'm
Have you
totally
have you
clueless.
have you made a trip back there physically to see if the tree is gone and it's always been a visitor center now, or are you sure it's two different spots entirely?
Well, let me finish the story. This is kind of bizarre. Um, so here's this recurring dream. It's in a different place, but the same exact pose. Now, because I had a very vivid memory of that family album, and because my mom died very young, and then that album was just put aside and I never saw it again, nobody else ever touched it. Years later, when we were adults, my oldest brother gave me that album, just said, here, you can have this. And I open up the album, and the family is posing in front of the little visitor center like I always had in my dream, and not in that front of the tree. you
Wow.
know so
Yeah.
that always kind of tripped me out. Of course, it led me to question myself quite often, but it's like, no, when you're a kid, I don't care how old you are, your old memories never change. It's just the short-term memories can change the older you get, but I've got a pretty good memory. And because that was such a big thing, and it really connoted to me a lot of emotional content when my mom was still alive, and it was her thing. And then it was kind of like a treasure getting this album, and I opened it up and said, that's the picture in my dream, not the one that I used to look at over and over and over again when I was a kid.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Wild.
Bizarre,
Yeah.
believe it or not, but that's my experience.
Yeah. And
Wild
it's,
stuff.
it's interesting because you start to question your own reality, right? It's like, did I really think that, remember that?
Yeah.
And what we're talking, the fundamental aspect of here is memory. And what is memory? And like I was saying, it was a couple shows ago, time for me is memory, based on memory. Because like, if we don't have a memory of something, we don't remember the past, then time goes away for our own personal experience. So this Mandela stuff really causes us to start questioning our own selves, and because it's all, how else do we prove it? People are in the chat like, prove it, prove it, prove it.
Yeah, that's how a lot of people are about the Mandela effect. Like, but it's like, how do you prove that you had a dream about something? When we come back from a night dream, the only proof we have is our memory of it. Now, with the Mandela effect, it's kind of the same premise. Our memory is the proof. But with the ME, we have a way stronger memory of different things. But that doesn't matter. Because all the people who worship the matter materialism paradigm don't want to hear that. Fortunately, we're in a position to where there's residue left over from the other waking dream reality we were in. And we have the numbers on our side too, because it's one thing for a single person to try to prove they remember something, but a lot of us were all dreaming the same collective waking dream where Mr. Rogers said it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. And the crazy thing is most people don't even realize they've merged with another waking dream layer where he never said that. They still think they're in that other waking dream where he says it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. That's how subtle the dream merging can be. We don't even have to fall asleep to find ourselves in another dream layer with slightly different reality changes, guys. And some people may say, so are you saying that every single Mandela effect change is us merging with a different dream layer? I'm not going to pretend that I know all the mechanics behind how reality works. I just know that whenever I have a night dream, I have zero knowledge of how I merged with that night dream reality, or even the fact that I've merged with it, because at the time, when I'm in that night dream reality, it just seems like reality to me and not a dream, you know? So, I don't know. I'm just putting the question out there. How do we know waking life doesn't function in a similar way to where you find yourself in an altered reality or waking dream without any knowledge that you even entered into a new reality at the time? And then, of course, after the fact, we notice different Mandela effect changes. Then it becomes apparent to us that we've merged with the new reality, unbeknownst to us, when the merging was happening in real time. Like, maybe this happens countless times without us even noticing. I don't know. But yeah, I just thought that video clip was yet more proof that dreams are way more than we think. Like, what if we're merging in and out of an infinite number of realities, and the proof of that are all the different Mandela effects? Or maybe we're just in like one waking dream reality, but like different things within that one waking dream reality are just kind of changing. Like, how stuff can morph and change in your night dreams. Maybe that happens in this waking dream. And I think there is something to salvia and certain substances that can change our experience of reality by altering our consciousness. Because, like I was saying earlier, reality kind of is a manifestation of consciousness. So even like when it comes to seizures and epilepsy, they have the ability to alter people's consciousness and cause things like really strong deja vu. I've heard countless stories about that. I had one person leave a comment on my sleep paralysis video about how she experiences the exact same thing I go through with my sleep paralysis and astral projection when she has an epilepsy episode. But the guy in the clip I'm gonna show, he actually escaped from the parallel reality he was trapped in for 8 years when he had a seizure. But I don't know. I think as a community, we've kind of grown complacent with the Mandela effect, myself included. I think we've fallen short of trying to figure out the deeper implications of the Mandela effect. I mean, we went from being in shock and awe back in 2016 when a lot of us first discovered it. But then, I don't know, after a while, we just kind of went back to our lives. I mean, I went through a period where I was pretty obsessed with it every day for a pretty long time. But then, I mean, it's like, well, now what? And really, the way this reality is, it like forces you to be distracted. We all still have bills to pay. And to a certain extent, I don't think it's our fault that this world basically hypnotized us back into thinking that life is just this mediocre thing. And after a while, that's what this Mormon preacher started to do. I want to say like maybe, when did he say? He said after about 4 years of living in that alternative or parallel reality, he actually was able to convince himself that the life he lived before he fell into that parallel reality was just a false memory or like delusion. And that's what everyone around him kept telling him, that it wasn't real. His old life wasn't real. Kind of like what we deal with in the Mandela effect community. We're just all mass misremembering. That's all that is. Yeah, sometimes it's less painful, I think, to be asleep to things. That's why that guy had to do what he had to do. But even he said, there was always residue left behind from his old reality when he'd watched different TV shows or movies. But yeah, I don't know. I always thought the Mandela effect was like some kind of clue to let those people with ears to hear and eyes to see know that reality doesn't work the way we've been told. I think it was like a sign to let us know we don't have to stay trapped in this lower dream realm that we think is life. I mean, I still believe that. And that's kind of where I was going with all the Christ consciousness and spiritual singularity videos I was making. But, anyways, I'm going to play this clip of this guy. I know a lot of you may think his claims are just too crazy to believe. But all I'm saying is take it with a grain of salt. I'm still on this journey of trying to figure out the Mandela effect and how reality works. So, I can't say for sure if his story is real or not, but I do know it's been years, like a little over half a decade, and we still don't have any answers for the ME. So I'm not taking his story totally off the table just yet.
See, I grew up in a peculiar way. I was a Mormon preacher, for a very serious Mormon preacher, until I was 40 years old or so. I had I've had kind of a tough life. I've not had an easy life. My family actually emigrated from Ireland in the 1800s, from Kilkenny, and joined the Mormon Church, and took a sailing ship from Liverpool all the way to Louisiana, which was how people got to America before there was railroads and Ellis Island and whatnot. So they showed up on the banks of the Mississippi River, essentially, and built hand carts, which is just basically a big push cart that you load all of your worldly belongings into, and you and your family just push that push cart in a westerly direction until you find Salt Lake City. And there were hundreds of people that were in that wagon train, and they made their way to Utah, and that's where I was born. I was born in this little town that my family stole from the Indians in the 1800s, and my entire life I'd never really done anything. I was all set to live a kind of a sleepy life until I had a business partner that killed his mother-in-law for the life insurance money. And I turned him in, and the government put me in witness protection. And I ended up in Alaska. They sent me to Alaska just to get away from things while the trial happened. And while I was in Alaska as a Mormon preacher, I decided that my friend, who was a sergeant in the Army, convinced me that it would be a good idea that he had been hearing about this thing called, I guess it was artificial marijuana. Do you guys have artificial marijuana in Ireland? Do you have, they call it spice here.
Yeah, we spice.
No?
Do we?
Okay. Well, so he had been hearing about spice. He didn't know it was called spice. It was when spice had just come out. And he had been hearing his soldiers talk about this artificial marijuana, and the Army did not test for it. And so he asked me in a letter, he said, is this something that maybe the Mormon Church has a blind spot about too? Because he wanted to be able to, when he came home for Christmas, be able to smoke fake marijuana with me. And we'd have a great time. Our kids played together, and we lived right next door to each other. Our wives were friends, and he just thought it would be the greatest thing in the world if he and I could celebrate the fact that he was home for war for Christmas by going down into his gun room and smoking some marijuana together. So we planned this out over letters back and forth from Iraq. He tells me, it's legal in every head shop. Go into a head shop and just ask them for this legal marijuana, and get a big bong and get all the accoutrements, and then we'll have the greatest Christmas ever. So I do that. I go into a head shop and I ask the head shop, I say, I'm looking for this stuff. It's not marijuana. It's perfectly legal. My friend said they sell it in all the shops. And she said, salvia? And I was like, yeah, that sounds right. So she sold me 20 times concentrate salvia. Do you guys know what salvia is?
Haven't a clue.
Okay, well, it's an extract of a sage plant that the Indians smoked here, and it's a powerful psychedelic, and I had no idea. I thought that I was buying fake marijuana, and instead I bought a powerful psychedelic that was, for some reason, and still is, perfectly legal in the United States. So I buy a giant
Before
bong.
we go on any further,
Yeah.
you were very quick to say that your family stole land off the Native Americans. Not many Americans would be willing to say that.
So at the end of this time, they have this whole valley that these 20 or so men can divide up amongst themselves, and my family is one of the beneficiaries of that land grab. And so that land just gets passed on from father to son and subdivided amongst all the children with every generation. And I find myself in a situation in this little town that I grow up in where I'm literally within a few blocks of every member of my family, both sets of grandparents, both sets of great grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, everybody. So it's like I grew up in Cantwell town, you know?
Yeah.
But nobody ever left. Nobody ever leaves this little comfortable burg that we're at, and until I do. And I've never been back.
That's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
That's rough. And have you spoken to your family since?
Oh yeah. And that you know, when I quit the Mormon Church, which is, you know, we'll get into how that happened.
Yeah.
But they went through a rough patch with it. There are several members of my family that don't really talk to me anymore and have kind of disowned me. They all had a rough period with it, but two of my brothers and my sister found their way back to having a regular relationship with me now on the new terms that my life exists under.
Let's go back to that. Is it
Were you
salvia?
at the moment where you said that you got this extract from like sage or something?
Salvia, please.
So yeah, so I had bought this stuff called salvia, thinking it was just going to be a mild version of marijuana.
Okay.
And I'd never in my entire life. Mormons are not allowed to have stimulants or drugs of any kind. They're not allowed to have coffee or even tea. Mormons basically just keep themselves completely drink water and milk, essentially, is what I grew up my entire life drinking.
Oh, bro, that sucks. Shit.
Yeah.
Were there any loopholes?
No, I had, at this point in my life, I had never been intoxicated in any way, not even having had painkillers. So when I broke my ankle once, and the strongest thing that I had was ibuprofen. So I'd never even felt that feeling before. And my friend, who, you know, did not grow up Mormon and who was a hardened, you know, Army sergeant, he was fascinated by that. And I was fascinated by the fact that he had used to smoke marijuana when he was a boy before he joined the Army. And he would tell me stories about smoking marijuana, and he would get wistful about those days. And I would, you know, it sounded amazing to me, but I was precluded from being able to do it because of my religion. And at this time, I'm a very serious Mormon. I'm a Mormon preacher. I have a congregation. I have this big, beautiful family. I've been married for 21 years, you know, to a Mormon, my Mormon wife, and that's just the life that I've built my own house in Alaska, where I was sent for this witness protection thing. That trial was long over, but I loved Alaska and I was staying. So that's kind of the intersection in my life that I'm at. 40 years old, and I feel like a virgin of life. You know, I just never done anything.
Yeah.
So I go and get this gear, and it's Christmas Day. Our kids all open their presents. our wives go into the kitchen to get lunch ready, and he gives me the high sign, and we go down into the basement to where he has this gun room, and that's where I've wrapped up this present for us. And we open the present together. We load the bong with frosty water, and load this huge bowl piece full of this black tar looking salvia stuff that just came in this foil wrapper. And I just, a lot of my friendship with him was just basically proving, I think, to him that I was man enough to be friends with him in some ways, because he was like this army sergeant that had been everywhere and was killing people in the war, and he was this badass, and I was this, Mormon guy. And so in some ways, I think I volunteered to go first because, I didn't want to go small dicks to the salvia party. And so I volunteered to go first. I hit the bowl piece with a micro torch and just took the biggest hit that I could possibly do. I've been watching videos on people taking bong rips, and I just had hit a big manly bong rip and held it, and then I felt the floor. And the best way to describe it is I felt like my molecules and the molecules in the floor no longer had anything to do with each other. And I just slid right through the floor of his basement, and there was a short sensation of falling, and then there was a sensation of falling up, and I fell up into a person. I found myself on the deck of this little water skiing boat, coughing up water, and there were a bunch of guys surrounded me on the deck of this water ski boat who were trying to sit me up and pounding my back and saying, "Man, we thought you drowned," but I didn't know any of them. I was suddenly outside. It was warm. It wasn't Christmas anymore, and I was just that's what this salvia trip was. So I was just looking around and amazed at how real everything was. I mean, it was as real as this. It was just the water was wet. I didn't know any of these guys, but they all seemed to know me, and they thought that I'd been water skiing and that I was this different person. And I looked down and I looked slightly different, but it's hard to tell. And I just start laughing. I just start laughing and telling all of these guys that none of this is real, and that I'm having a salvia trip, and I'm in witness protection in Alaska, and I'm in my friend's basement, and it's Christmas time, and I'm saying this stuff to these guys, and as I start to tell them this stuff, they get this very worried look on their face, and they're just like, holy shit, and they take the water ski boat back to the dock. They don't even take the time to load it onto the trailer. We just all jump into their pickup truck, and they drive me to this urgent care facility where I go in, and they tell the doctor, they're like, "Hey, our friend was water skiing with us. He fell off his board and was floating face down for a while. By the time we could circle back with the boat and pick him up, he probably had his face underwater for about 3 minutes. And now he doesn't remember any of us. He says that, he lives in Alaska, and that he's Mormon, and that he's in witness protection, and that it's Christmas time." And the doctor's like, well, that's, so they shine lights in my eyes, and they have me cross my legs and hit my knee with a rubber hammer, and they test all of my, they test my blood oxygen, and they just do all of the rudimentary things to listen to my lungs. And the doctor says, well, he's fine medically, and true medical amnesia is really rare, almost unheard of. So he'll probably remember everything by morning. So take him home and put him to bed. He hasn't got a concussion, and if it persists, call us tomorrow. So they take me. I'm still freaking. It's been hours now at this point. It's been hours. I can't believe how long this salvia trip is lasting. I'm like wondering what's happening, in Alaska. What my family is saying. Am I missing Christmas dinner? Is my Mormon family freaking out because surely they've discovered now that I've been doing drugs if it's gone on for 5 hours. So my new friends, none of whom I remember, but all of whom claim that they went to school with me my entire life, take me back to this shitty little apartment that I apparently live in, and use the keys that were in my jeans to unlock the door, take me into this little apartment where there are my belongings, clothes that fit me, pictures of me, some of them with these guys on the wall, old yearbooks. and they just say, okay, we'll see you tomorrow. Try to remember us, ha ha ha, and they leave. And I just sit there on the couch and wait for the salvia trip to end. You know, I'm looking through old yearbooks, looking at pictures of myself, and it's real. Nothing is psychedelic. There are no trippy, you know, there are no tracers. There's no colors. It's just a normal fucking Tuesday.
That's fucking scary.
And I live in Tyler. Tyler, Texas is the name of this town. It's a place it's a real town, but I had never been there before.
Yeah.
And I just lived in Tyler, Texas. So I drift off to sleep on the couch looking at yearbooks. I wake up to the sound of pounding on the door. And the same friend that dropped me off the night before comes in and says, you didn't come to work. Come on, get dressed. We got to take you to work. He throws some clothes on me, throws me in his pickup truck, and takes me to this farm where I work supervising migrant labor. And I just stand there with a clipboard in my hand all day long with a bemused look on my face, just telling everybody who will listen that I'm not real and they're not real and this isn't really happening. And I live in Alaska and I'm Mormon and I'm in witness protection. And so all this crazy shit. And they all just kind of try to laugh it off. But I'm starting to get, worried that it's been a really long time. It's been now 24 hours since I've been in this trip. I'm thinking I must be in the hospital in real life. I must have had some sort of a reaction.
Yeah.
So he takes me home from my day of work and puts me to bed again. And I sit there on top of the bed, just worried, wanting it to be over like right now, worried that what's going on, worried that I'm in a coma. Did I die? Is this limbo? You know, because I'm a very religious person at this point still in my life.
And just before we move on, Thomas, can you look up what was it, salvia?
Salvia.
And pull it up. Yeah. Okay. This is a lot.
Yeah.
Obviously.
Fuck. Jesus, man.
And like when you're dreaming, they say like, name a time in a dream ever you've seen your phone. Did you have a phone in this?
Yeah.
Okay,
everything.
Phone.
I paid a phone. I fucking voted. I paid taxes. I had a fucking cable bill.
Who's the president?
It was Barack Obama at the time, and everything. And I would spend as the days turned into weeks, and I lived every minute of every day in this salvia trip for 8 years.
Look up salvia trip. Yeah.
Yeah. And at this point, I had never heard of salvia. So if I had ever done what you're doing and looked up, there are stories on the internet of people getting stuck as a coat of paint on a barn for 30 years. And they feel every single day of that 30 years being stuck as a coat of paint. So in some ways I got off easy, but I didn't know anything could last that long at this point. I think it's just, a mild form of marijuana. And I think there's no possible way that I'm supposed to be, it shouldn't last 8 years.
Did you ever think of trying to locate yourself?
Did you ever think of trying to go to Alaska?
Yes, all of those things. I tried all of those things. I tried calling my house. I tried calling my old high school. I tried calling, because my family had been in that little town for generations. So at one point, I actually loaded my ass into an old Pinto and drove the 1,000 miles or so to Smithfield, Utah from Tyler, Texas, and went into this little town fully expecting to see the town that I'd remember for my entire life. A whole hill on the graveyard with Cantwell names on the tombstones, and none of that was accurate. I went into that town and it was exactly like going into a town that you'd never been to before. I was just, none of it was the way I remembered it. The high school was named something different. I went into the high school and asked them if there was any record. My dad had been a school teacher at that school. They had no record of him. So it's just, it was
kind of like you were someone else and your entire family never existed.
Yes. So it was exactly as my new friends in Tyler, my old friends in Tyler were telling me. They said, you had a near drowning incident. You have brain damage, my friend. We have known you your entire life. You've never been Mormon. You know, your family were Methodists, and you were never in witness protection. To our knowledge, you've never been to Alaska. It's just some sort of a fantasy that happened when you were without oxygen. And everybody in this town told me this same story. Everybody at the grocery store would come up to me and say, I know you don't remember us because of your accident, but I was your teacher in 2nd grade, and you were a nice little boy, and my name is Mrs. Eskelson. And, you know, so everybody in this town, to a person, was telling me that they had remembered me for the last 40 years of my life. And faced with that as evidence, and all of the evidence that I could find on the internet, everywhere else, there was no evidence of the Steve Cantwell that was involved in witness protection, and there was no evidence of my family members, you know. So eventually, at about the 4-year mark, I slowly decided that I had imagined my entire family and my entire life, and that I actually had brain damage, and it caused me to forget all of my friends in this town called Tyler that loved me very much and were very patient with my brain damage. But I, you know, rather than just trying to push everybody away because I thought that they were imaginary, at about the halfway mark somewhere, I started to hang out with my friends and to take them up on offers to go camping, and to, you know, we would play, we had this little, they would play guitars and stuff like that after work, and we would just sort of jam, and it sort of turned into a band. And I like when they dropped me off in my apartment in Tyler, there was a ukulele on the couch, and I had not played ukulele before this, but when I picked up the ukulele, I knew how to play the ukulele. My fingers knew the places to go on the strings. I didn't know the names of any of the chords, but my fingers knew where all the chords were, and that was trippy. But I eventually started playing the ukulele with them after work, and we formed a band called Electric Watermelon, and we would, I mean, it never turned, you know, nothing ever came of it, but we would play mostly backyard parties. We played a couple of weddings, and you know, we played at the fair and the rodeo one time. So, but it was mostly the camaraderie. It was the fact that I was accepting the fact that I was actually in Tyler, Texas, and that I was not trying to get back to this family that I thought that I had in this marriage of 21 years. I've just accepted the fact that I never got married. I was just hanging out with all of my friends from high school that also never got married. We all worked at this apple orchard together, and that just became my life. And so the last 4 years of my time in Tyler were actually quite nice. I sometimes I would quietly mourn my family. It would always puzzle me. I would sit at night in my house sometimes and watch old movies and television shows that I remembered watching with my family. I had specific memories of these old movies, and it puzzled me that I could remember the plot line for this movie and remember, you know, sitting there next to my daughter during a Disney cartoon, and I could remember listening to her laugh at this movie, but I was trying to wrap my head around the fact that my daughter was imaginary, and that my brain was just remembering, you know, Mulan because I'd seen it before my accident. So that kind of shit always fucked with my head a little bit, but eventually I just kind of learned to just accept it as a phenomenon and just kind of shrug my shoulders, because I also knew a ridiculous amount of things about Mormonism, which I could not contend with. You know, I knew because all the things that I knew about Mormonism, with the secret handshakes and the magic underwear and stuff like that, those are things that Mormons don't really talk about. Every Mormon always wears magic underwear that goes from their knees to their elbows. You wear it 24 hours a day. It's supposed to protect you from bullets, knives, evil spirits, werewolves, anything. And I spent my entire life wearing magic underwear. And I looked that up on the internet when I was in Tyler, and that was exactly accurate. And all that handshake stuff was exactly accurate. And all of the detailed knowledge that I had about the history of the Mormon Church was accurate. And so that was a real fucking head scratcher for me.
I just want to say, for anyone who's like scratching their head right now, just think about putting yourself in that situation. You know, you're off with the lads. You know, you got a little doob of some sort, and one massive pull, and suddenly you wake up. You know, you've these people pulling you out of the water, and they're super concerned. You sound like you're a crazy person to them, and then the whole process of going to the doctor, living a life, years. You know, as you said, that just sounds crazy. 8 years.
How did you wake up? Like how did that happen?
Well, I think we'll get to that.
Yeah. So so while I'm looking up the Mormon Church and wondering at how I have all this knowledge about the Mormon Church, I look a little bit further, and I look into the, you know, because most of the people that are talking about the secret handshakes and the magic underwear are people that have left the Mormon Church, and so they've got all this realistic but negative shit to say about it. And so for the first time in my life, I don't know anybody around me that's Mormon, so I have the courage, I think, to really look at some of those viewpoints for the first time, knowing that no one's going to look over my shoulder. You know, if my logic is, if I really am Mormon and I'm looking where God has told me not to look on the internet, I'm not really doing it because I'm imagining this. And if I'm not imagining this, then I'm not really Mormon. So with that logic scale, it just allowed me to read everything about the Mormon Church. And I convinced myself that, you know, if I ever had been involved with the Mormon Church, that it was probably a mistake. And I convinced myself that it was a cult. And so, you know, I go on living my life in Tyler, Texas, playing an electric watermelon, hanging out with my friends, do a better job at my job. My boss gives me a raise because, you know, he thinks that I've like pushed beyond my brain damage, and I'm able to be more helpful around the farm. And so I just lived this very normal life for the last 4 years. And my last day in Tyler, I'm actually walking across the park with a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken under my arm. I can see my friends in the distance hanging around this picnic table talking, and I'm walking towards them. And for no reason, just I get that same feeling where my feet don't have, the molecules in my body don't have anything to do with the molecules on the ground. And I just find myself falling through the grass in this park. And there's the same short sensation of falling, and then that sensation of falling up. And I find myself on the floor in my friend's gun room, and I am having a full seizure. I'm just like, you know, and my wife is behind me, holding onto my head and my arm, and the room is spinning around me, and then I feel it spin and then slow down, and then everything just sort of locks into place molecularly is the best way I can describe it.
Yeah.
And then suddenly the seizure stops. My friend, who has got a scared look on his face, is dialing the phone at this moment, dialing 911 for an ambulance to come. And my wife says, hang up, I think he's coming out of it. And I came out of it, and I just exploded crying. You know, I just could not believe the fact that I was back. I was actually in Alaska, and my wife, who I thought I had imagined, was there holding me, and I could hear my kids outside in the hallway saying, "What's wrong with Daddy?" You know, but they sounded very real. And I had pissed myself all over the floor, but I just started blabbering to both of them and telling them this story of the last 8 years of my life. And oh my God, I thought I imagined you. And I'm just talking a million miles an hour. And she's like, you know, shut up, you're ruining Christmas. I can't believe you were down here doing drugs. And so my friend lends me a pair of sweatpants and lets me go into the guest bathroom and wash the piss off of me so that I can come up and eat Christmas dinner with the family.
I doubt you were very hungry.
I felt like I hadn't eaten in 8 years. But So I just told her. I told her this whole story while I was showering the piss off of myself. But I was still so out of it that I got out of the shower and was toweling off when I realized that I'd actually also shit myself a little. And so I shit their towel too. And so I'd like pissed on the floor and shit their towel and had a seizure and then woke up weepy, super weepy about how I loved everybody and I couldn't believe this. And then she gets me under control, gets me dressed into some borrowed clothes. I go upstairs and it's like a Christmas carol. You know, it's Christmas. My children, who I haven't seen in 8 years, are gathered like angels all around the dinner table, and I just start to cry as soon as I come in the room. And I'm walking around and petting their hair. And I'm not telling them the story at this point, but I'm like kissing them and making a fucking ass of myself. And
You were still a little high at this point, were you?
I don't think that I was high. I think I was just, because, it felt like I was within a few minutes that I was back with it, had all my faculties, but I was still just shocked by the fact that I was back and that all of this was real. And I guess I really do live in Alaska, and I guess I really am Mormon, and that threw me. The last thing I expected that I was going to be Mormon. When we left there, I told my wife, I said, hey, one of the things I figured out on this trip is that I don't want to be Mormon anymore. I want us to get out of the Mormon church. I don't want the kids to grow up Mormon. So I walked into that gun room, a Mormon preacher. And by the way, total elapsed time, they said, that I was having this trip. My friend and my ex-wife, their best estimate, 45 seconds. 45 seconds of having a seizure on the floor equated 8 years, every minute of 8 years, in an imaginary version of Tyler, Texas. But the crazy thing is, I walked in there as a Mormon preacher and walked out as an atheist. And we immediately sold our house.
I
sold
have
our
to
business.
ask.
Yeah.
Okay, you went in there a Mormon, but after everything you experienced in that trip, how could you come out an atheist? You have to have thought something after that. Maybe Mormonism wasn't the right way to go about it. Maybe there was something different. Have you ever thought about that?
Well, I have since come around to that way of thinking. But I have to say, the place that I was at when I came out of that gun room, the dark place that I had been in Tyler, Texas, feeling like I did not feel, at a certain point, I was confident that no just God would ever allow this to happen to me. And I felt completely ignored by God. And so while I was in Tyler, I convinced myself that there was... Yeah.
Like Jesus got crucified.
Yeah. It was a test of my faith, and I for sure failed.
That's fair.
I had a question.
It's definitely up to your interpretation. Like, that is fucking crazy.
Oh yeah, have you ever
I've
tried?
talked to people with crazy experiences, but none like that.
Have you ever gone back to Tyler? Like,
Real Tyler?
Yeah, real Tyler.
Yeah, it's nothing like the way I remembered it. It's much bigger. There are no mountains around it. They don't grow apples. They've nothing. There nothing about my version of Tyler was anything similar to the real Tyler. So it was just, I think my brain just needed a blank space on the map where it could just put stuff up there without any objections from myself. And just Tyler was a town that I knew existed and had never been to. So I think that's why. Tyler, to be truthful, Tyler kind of looked like a different version of the little town that I grew up in. It was about that size. There were kind of mountains around it like that. The streets had changed a little bit, but, that was essentially...
Thomas, I think we need to forward this guy on to Lisa Scott. She's like a psychotherapist.
Oh, yeah.
She does a podcast as well. I think you would have an amazing conversation with her.
I'm sure I would.
Because you're reflecting on this place was similar to your childhood home and so on. So I think you have a great conversation with her. Cool dog, by the way.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, man.
But
trying to take this in.
but though it wasn't real, though the experience, I've had every opinion about this, by the way. When I first came back I thought that I had maybe slipped into a different dimension. I thought maybe, you know, the current version that I believe in now is I think that possibly all of this is imaginary, that all of this is an illusion around us. And I, you know, I'm sure I'll change my mind about that at some point. But the thing about it is no matter whether it was real or fake, it had the ability to change my life in such a way that nobody in my family in 7 generations has had the ability to escape from this little path that we were on. And, you know, I walked in there never doubting, you know, having absolute crystal clear faith that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was the true church, and that there was a Mormon Jesus in heaven watching over me and, you know, making sure that I always wore my magic underwear and that I never masturbated. And that's how I had spent 40 years. But when 45 seconds on the gunroom floor, and I woke up having a completely different opinion. I wanted to get away from Alaska as quickly as I could. I kind of took a page out of the witness protection manual, kind of, and we sold our house, we sold our business, and we moved to Hawaii within a few months.